Welcome to Godly Play this Sunday. I'm glad that you can be with me. And I'm also grateful that Chris can be our door person and help you enter into this story today. And the first thing that we do is we greet one another. God be with you.
And also with you.
And then we look over to see what time it is, and we see that we are still in the green and growing time, moving closer and closer to Advent and then Christmas. So now it's time for our story. And this is a story that takes place in the desert box. And I have everything that I need from the sacred story shelves right here in this basket. And so I'll begin. So many important things happened in the desert that we just have to have a small piece of the desert right here in this room to help us remember those stories. The desert is a strange and wonderful place, but it can be dangerous. The people did not go into the desert unless they had a good reason. During the day, the sun beats down on the desert sand and it's burning hot. And at night, it can be freezing cold when the sun goes down. When the wind blows in the desert, it picks up the sand and moves the sand, changing the shape of the desert, so people can get lost. Hardly anything grows in the desert, and it's hard to find water, and we need them to stay alive. The people did not go into the desert unless they had a good reason. Now, after the great flood that had covered the earth, the creatures went out in the four directions of the earth to fill it up with life again. And they would settle close to water, in towns, villages, and sometimes great cities. And one of the most ancient of the great cities was called Ur. And the people who lived in the city of Ur, they believed in many gods. They believed that everything had its own god. The rivers, the land, the sky, the trees, the creatures. The world was alive with gods. But there was one family who would come to believe something different. They didn't know it then, but they would come to believe that all of God, of one God, was in everything. The man's name was Abram, and he was married to Sarai. And the time came for them to leave the city of Ur and go to a new place. They didn't know if God would be there. But they gathered together the young people, the children, the old people, their goats, their tents, and all their belongings, and their journey began. During the day, they followed the course of the great river, the Euphrates. They would walk along the riverbank. And at night, they pitched their tents close to the river, so they had water for themselves and for their animals. It was a very long journey. But they kept on going. And then they were there. They had come to a place called Haran, and the people of this town had come out to greet them and welcome them, and so they decided to settle there. And for some years, life was good. But something was missing. Often Abram would go to the edge of the town, and he would look out across the desert. And once, when he was looking out across the desert, God came so close to Abram, and Abram came so close to God, that he knew what God wanted him to do. God was going to bless them and make them a blessing to others. And they were going to have a great family. God was going to show them the way. And so they packed up everything that they had again. Some of the family went with them, and some stayed behind. And their journey began for a second time. They went west towards the land of Canaan. But this time, there was no river for them to follow. First, they came to a place called Shechem, where they settled. Abraham had climbed a hill and prayed to God, and God was there. And so they built an altar of stones to mark the place where they had come close to God. They traveled on. And next they settled in a place between Bethel and Ai. And they prayed to God in that place. And God was there. And they built an altar to mark where they had come close to God. And they began to understand that God was not just in this place or here or there, but that all of God was in every place. Finally, they settled in a place called Hebron. They pitched their tents under the oak trees of Mamre. One night, God called to Abram, and he went outside the tent and looked up at the night sky. It was filled with stars. And God came close to Abram again and told Abram that one day he would be called father of many, and Sarai would be called mother of many, because they were going to have a great family that would number as many as the stars that he could see in that sky. Abram laughed. It was impossible, because he and Sarai were much too old now to have children. But they changed their names anyway, and Abram became known as Abraham, father of many, and Sarai was called Sarah, mother of many. One day, 3 strangers came from the desert, and as was the custom, they welcomed them into their tent, and they gave them a great feast. Sarah had mixed together 3 measures of flour, which is a lot, and she baked bread, and they gave the strangers meat and bread and milk and water, as was the custom. And the strangers told Abraham that one day he and Sarah would have a child. And this time it was Sarah who laughed. She was listening at the entrance to the tent. It was impossible because she was now much too old to have a child. The three strangers went away. And some months later, Abraham and Sarah laughed again with joy because they had a son. And they named him Laughter, which in their language is Isaac. And Sarah, once Isaac was grown, was now old and full of years. And she died, and the family buried her in a cave east of Hebron, the cave of Machpelah. Abraham was also old and full of years, and he missed Sarah, but he knew he had something important to do, and that was to find a wife for his son Isaac. And so he sent his most trusted helper all the way back to Haran to find a wife from their own family. The helper came to rest outside the town by a well, and he watched the young women come to the well for water. He wondered if any of them might have the courage or the kindness to offer him water. And one of them did. Her name was Rebecca. She not only gave him water, but she gave him water for his animals. And he asked to meet her family. And when he met them, he told them about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. And they asked Rebecca if she would go to Hebron with the helper and marry Isaac. And she said yes. And she took that long journey with the helper all the way to Hebron. And Isaac had been waiting. And when he saw them coming, he ran out to greet them. And he and Rebekah were married. And soon after that, Abraham, who was also full of years, he died. And the family came together to bury him in the cave with his wife, Sarah. Isaac and Rebekah had children, and those children grew up and got married and had children. And those children grew up and married and had children. And this went on for thousands and thousands of years until your grandparents had your parents who had you. And God's promise came true that one day God's family would number as many as the stars in the sky and as many as the grains of sand in the desert. So now that you've heard the story of the beginnings of the great family of God, I wonder what part of this story you liked the best. I wonder what part of this story you thought was the most important part. I wonder if there's any part of this story that is especially about you or something that has happened to you. And as you think about this story of Abraham and Sarah, Rebekah and Isaac, I wonder if there's any part that you would leave out if you could. but we would still have all the story we need. So I wonder what your work might be today while you're at home. It could be that you want to write something about your own family. You might want to paint something or make something out of clay. Only you know what your work will be. But as you go, I would like to share a blessing with you, a blessing that has been part of our faith for a long, long time. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord lift up his face and shine on you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.